Well, good evening and welcome to the Georgia Probe, Georgia Virtual College Fair. We are excited that you've joined us for this session to test or not to test. If you have questions for any of our panelists at any time, you will need to use the Q&A button, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. As this is a webinar, the presenters cannot see you nor can they hear you, so the Q&A button is the only way that you can share those questions. Wednesday and Thursday, there will be more sessions, and these will be specifically about colleges and universities. Please go back to the Georgia Probe website to register for these programs. You can do that at gaprobe/students. And finally, there will be a recording made of this presentation. So if you do want to go back and review it, again, visit the Georgia Probe website and you can check it out at any time. And now, here is our presentation.
Great. Well, thanks, Julie. We appreciate it. And thanks to StriveScan and also to Probe for hosting the program. Really looking forward to the conversation and have some great colleagues along with me tonight to facilitate this. So let me kick it off by saying my name is Rick Clark. I'm the Director of Admission at Georgia Tech. And, you know, today is a beautiful day on campus. I'm here once or twice a week and had a chance to walk around a little bit and you know, just given that we are all going through the pandemic, that the election is here this week and everybody's got a lot of big and important and heavy things on your mind, I thought you might appreciate two things. One, there is a pumpkin patch on our campus that people have been painting and putting just really encouraging messages and words on. And that's really just great to see. And so I think there's probably a lot of you tonight where you're like, oh, that's really sweet. That's really great and really uplifting. For those of you who would be on the other side, you'll also appreciate some of those pumpkins have been completely smashed. And so, you know, really there's a little bit for everybody here tonight. I wanted to kind of bring you joy either way, however you're made, wherever you are right now. Maybe you're in a pumpkin smashing mode and there's a band for that, but also a moment for that too. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend and colleague, Travis Culver from Emory.
Hi, my name is Travis Culver. I am one of the associate deans at Emory, and I am specifically housed on the Oxford campus. I think a cool kind of tidbit and interesting tidbit about Emory is that there are two entry points, one being Emory College and the other being Oxford College, located 40 miles east of Atlanta. And I hope that there will be questions about that afterwards. Welcome.
Great. Amy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Kanpas. I'm the Director of Admission at Agnes Scott College, small, private, liberal arts women's college in Decatur. And my fun fact is that because we don't have students on campus this semester, we're fully remote this semester. And so Agnes Scott actually was an early voting site for DeKalb County. So I think we had maybe the fourth largest number of votes cast at Agnes Scott in DeKalb County. So I'm super excited about that and very happy that we could utilize our campus in that way.
Very cool. Thank you. Scott?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Burke, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Admissions and Housing at Georgia State University. My position is unique because I am responsible for both admissions and housing, so I think that's kind of my fun fact about me. And we have 6 different campuses throughout the metro area, so you can get an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, and actually a PhD from Georgia State if you wish, and I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to interact with you throughout the night.
Very good. Well, thanks. So topic for tonight surrounds standardized testing. And traditionally, of course, this is one of those kind of key pillars or components of the college admission process that, you know, anytime you hear folks talk about how do they make admission decisions and what do students need to do, testing is usually part of that conversation. This year it still is, but it's just a very different concept, a very different conversation, you know. With all the administrations that were canceled, over the course of the spring and the summer. Here in Georgia, of course, our university system made the decision to allow schools not to require testing. And of course, privates, throughout the country for years, and many of those in our state for years have not required tests in order to make decisions. So, this idea of test score optional has been around, but it's just far more so now in the conversation and part of the conversation in terms of, should I take the test? If I have a test, should I send it? How's that going to be reviewed if I choose to have it looked at and if I don't? So that's kind of what we want to tackle tonight, largely. And Amy, since you guys at Agnes Scott have been test optional for a while, I think you're probably the authority here to talk a little bit about what is test optional. I know on the face of it, it's obvious, but help us understand, what does that really mean, and how does this go down in a college admission process?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So Agnes Scott has been a test optional college for about 10 years now. And that decision was really made at the time because our faculty members said, we get a lot of information in the application review process, right? Students have to submit a lot of that information. So is it possible that we can make a good decision about admission without using SAT and ACT scores? So for Agnes Scott, at the time when we were reviewing this, we did take a look at the students that came to Agnes Scott. We looked at their application information and we looked at how they did once they got to Agnes Scott to see, what is really helping us determine how well a student will do. And for us, it was a transcript, right? How is the student doing in their high school coursework? What classes are they taking? How prepared are they through that? And that really enabled us to think, okay, we can do this without test scores. So what I would tell you about test optional admission is that it really varies from school to school. It's super important that you go onto college websites, look at things that they're posting about their policies so that you understand how they sort of operate within test optional. At the very basic level, right? A college is sort of saying, we are giving you some different opportunities to present the information that you want to present in the application review process. And so when it actually comes down to it, when we read a test optional application, we're looking at everything that you submit as part of your application, every required material, everything in there to determine your admission to the college. And I think the other important piece of it is that some colleges, and I think many colleges right now are really strongly considering, not only admission, but scholarship. So Agnes Scott is a test optional college for both admission and scholarships. I think that's pretty similar for the schools here tonight. So that's my version of it, but I'm sure I'm missing something if anyone wants to add something in.
For sure. Well, that's an open invitation, Scott or Travis, if there is something that you guys would like to add to that, but we can continue to tackle various components of this as well. One thing, Travis, I did want to ask you, after years, I can say personally, I've done this. I feel like I've heard you guys do it yourselves, or people from all of our institutions do this over the years, is, we would say things like, I would say things like, well, scratch out optional. If they say optional, it's really required, right? If they say you're going to have an optional interview or an optional additional recommendation, you should do that if you feel like you could do a good job on that. Is this different, Travis? Does test optional really mean optional? And how is this maybe different than what we've all been saying, traditionally in the past?
Yeah, thank you. So this is different. We have to recognize, excuse me, the national landscape of where we are. And most, if not all of us, have made this decision based off of testing availability to students, considering family hardships and things that are going on. And so I think that colleges and universities are doing what we feel is the right thing to meet the needs of the time. So this really is not one of those things where we squint and say it's recommended, but really required. Test optional really does mean test optional. And we don't want you, and without getting ahead of myself, but we really don't want you to actually, we want you to put yourself in the best frame to tell your story. And that might be with a test or without a test, but it's completely up to you.
That's great. Hey, Scott, I know that before you came down to Georgia, you were up in Boston, and test optional started in Maine and just kind of has worked its way down the eastern seaboard. So you've got a lot of experience kind of with this as well. Another thing that's out there is test blind. And so students may be hearing test optional, test blind. You know, there is a lot of this jargon out there. Can you help us with that dichotomy a little bit and understand what does that mean?
Sure. Sorry. Making sure I'm unmuted here. Yeah. God, I've been in higher education now for over 20 years and have seen lots of different types of admissions processes. I've worked in selective admission and non-selective admission, and we've seen all kinds of new things being added into the mix. And certainly test blind is one of those where an institution truly is not looking at the test score at all, even if you submit it as a part of the admissions process, where in a test optional, the student can still send their test scores. It can still be a part of their overall application process. However, at a place like Georgia State, you know, we're encouraging students and telling students that if you have the test score, you know, it may not hurt you to submit it as a part of the admissions process. It could only help you, right? We're trying to find reasons to admit you to Georgia State. And so if you have a test score, it's never going to be that we'll use it against to hurt you for whether we admit you or not. It ultimately will only help you. And, you know, you have to look at each of the institutions that you're applying to and really get a sense of what they're saying about their test optional, or if they're truly in a test blind environment where whether you submit it or not, it's not going to factor into the admissions decision at all. You really just have to take some time and learn how your institutions are going to use it or not use it.
So let me follow up a quick question on that. And then I'd love to hear other people's response. Because I've had friends call me who have seniors and they're not even looking at Georgia Tech. And they're like, okay, just tell me, like, here's what she's got. This is, we were able to get a test. This is what she's got. This is where she's applying. You know, now, should she send it or not? Just like cut the crap down and dirty. What do you think? So you've referenced this a little bit. And Amy, I know you also said so much depends on the school that you're looking at. But outside of that, are there any type of like broad framework advice that you can give to a family who might be sitting here in that situation? They've got one, but they're debating, like, should I send it or not? What, any rails to run on there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to weigh in, but I think that might be a great question for all of us to sort
Absolutely.
of answer.
Yep.
So for Agnes Scott, we are actually a school where for test optional, what that means is that you have the chance to submit an SAT or ACT score as part of your application. If you would prefer to use something in lieu of those scores, then you have some options. So you can either, you ultimately are choosing one of three things and you have to choose one of three. So test scores, SAT or ACT scores, an evaluative interview that you do with your admission counselor at Agnes Scott, or a graded writing sample that has your teacher's comments and grade on it. And so students indicate that during, like, when they're submitting their comment application. And we really tell students, think of how you will best be represented by what you're submitting. I think it's important to look at a school's academic profile to understand more about sort of where, you know, their SAT and ACT mid-ranges are, but also really think about how will I best be represented as a student? Will this really help strengthen my application? But I still think you have to sort of get school specific to understand that.
Yep. So Travis, I'd love to hear your answer there. And then another question to tag on to that is, can I just call you if I have that question?
I would say yes to that one. That's an easy one. I have been getting these calls as well. And I think it begs the question of a little bit of how we use the test to start with. In a holistic review process, your test score was never the thing at places like the institutions here that was going to get you in or keep you out. So keep that in mind. I think that you should submit the test if you feel that it is a good representation of who you are as a student. Amy mentioned, taking a look at the middle 50%, which can be a good barometer. But I also tell students who fall below our middle 50% in their high schools, but they fall well above the middle 50% in their high school, that might be a great representation of you and your work. So, ask yourself, is this a good representation of me and my abilities? And if the answer is yes, then by all means, feel comfortable submitting that. It's your story.
And just real quick before we move on from that, can you help people who might not be as familiar? What do you mean by middle 50%? What is that? Where do I find that? What does it mean?
Yeah. So most schools will publish a middle 50%, and that means that there are a range, between middle 50%. And that means that there are 25% of students who are above that average, and there are 25% of students who are below that average. So that's the middle 50.
Right. So for instance, you might see a school say, okay, our middle 50% ACT is from a 28 to a 31, right? Meaning that 25% were below that 28 and 25% were above that 31, right? So yeah, that's great. Thank you. Scott, do you want to also follow up on that prior question?
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add to the conversation here, Rick, is just Georgia State specific, that GPA has always been the strongest indicator of a student's ability to succeed at Georgia State. And Rick, you and I have had a lot of conversations about test optional admission over the course of the last year, hoping that the regents would allow us to go in this direction. And I've talked a lot about the fact that really looking at the students' overall grades and the 17 core units that we require is a better indicator than almost anything else that a student could submit in our application process. And so I was delighted that we were able to move in this direction. And rigor is playing a big part in our admission as well. It's not only the 17 core units, but what you've also taken. And challenging yourself as a student matters in the admissions process, and especially as we get into reviewing students for our scholarships. So I know Amy had mentioned this earlier, that we are test optional for both admission to Georgia State as well as being test optional for our scholarships, including our presidential scholarship, because we ask for so much more in that review process. So there's more that we're able to take into consideration when we're reviewing students for those scholarships.
That's great. Yep. And I do believe, because we did this last month as well, all of us are in that boat with both admission and scholarships. But as has been said already, of course, important to continue to ask each college that you're looking at. Amy, I want to come back to you here and say, Scott just kind of gave a good example to say, one thing that we all are evaluated on is for the kids that we enroll, we need to look and sort of back map what's most predictive, right? And then our admission process should reflect that. We should be putting priority in selecting students based on what we learn they, incorporate into doing well on our campus. What are some of those things? So, Scott just talked about rigor of curriculum, course choice and course performance. What are some of those other things that are either at Agnes Scott specifically or just broad for folks?
Yeah, so specific to Agnes Scott would be the personal statement, but I think every college that requires a personal statement will say that is where we really get to know who you are. We get to really learn something about you that we wouldn't see elsewhere. It's like the personality of your application. So that's a really important thing. If a school requires recommendation letters, that's an important piece of it. Extracurricular activities. So what are you involved in outside of the classroom? Obviously, COVID has sort of changed some of that. And I want to say colleges understand that. So, but remember, we want to know sort of what you're interested in, who you are, what you're going to sort of bring to our campus. So those are the big ones that come to my mind.
That's good. Anything to add to that, Travis?
I guess it's so funny because, again, I've been doing this for so long, and I remember I'm going to say older people saying this when I was coming through admission, but it really is so much of telling your story. And, if you think about your favorite book, if you ripped out chapter 11, it would not be the same book or the same story. And so, think of your application that you're putting together as telling your story, and it all fits in to this narrative about who you are, what you bring to our campuses, and what you would take away from it. And so, in the same way, test scores were never the weighty part of it, and now it just means that we're looking at a different framework of your story that you're presenting.
That's good. Hey, Scott, in chat, there's a question about the ACT. And just specifically, would you recommend taking the ACT? Would you be able, I know you've got good experience in this, can you just maybe talk a little bit about what's the difference between these two tests, and when might a student benefit from taking both or just one? What's your guidance? You also have high school age kids, so enlighten us.
Yeah, so I have a ninth grader who next year, for the first time, will take the PSAT. And years ago there was an absolute huge difference between the two tests. Although now there's been a little bit more alignment in the sense that they're aligning it to the actual high school curriculum. I think ACT for years had been much closely aligned to the high school curriculum, and College Board, I think, has come up since then, doing a little bit more of that. The ACT has several more sections than the SAT. So you have the English, the math, the reading, the science, right? Did I get those? Get those all. Where with the SAT, you're looking at now just math and the new critical reading, which always escapes me now, but
ERW.
Yeah, ER, exactly. And so I guess that's kind of the main differences there in terms of the different types of things that they are ultimately testing for overall. We don't have a preference one way or the other. If you are submitting a test score, we don't have a preference whether it's an SAT over an ACT. That's really up to you and making that decision about what test might fit you best, and really studying and doing something to get a sense of what you feel might fit your strengths as a student in high school. So certainly take some time to make sure you're learning the difference between the two if you are truly going to be pursuing either an SAT or an ACT, depending upon the schools that you're applying to. Take a look at that from that perspective, what will fit your strengths as a high school student overall.
Good. Yep. Hey, Travis, question about APs, sending AP results or SAT subject tests as it relates to all this other stuff. I mean, the APs last spring, whether, if you were a junior then, now you're a senior and maybe you took them, but that was a little bit of a wonky situation. So what's your advice there, to students? Is it similar? Is it different than what we've been talking about?
Yeah, so this is one of those things I think where colleges would kind of say recommend it and wink. I think more now than ever, it really is optional. And understanding that last spring, students were not able to take them, and in many cases, the test was much different than it had been in the past, and so may not be as great of a predictor of success in some areas. So I don't think that you should panic about that. I don't think you should run out and try to take every subject exam that you can. It's recommended at most places and not required at others. AP exams, I think, will function in the same way. If you are able to take them, fantastic. If you're not, I think equally fantastic for you. But again, it's all up to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. Amy, I just want to clarify something real quick. So there's a question in the chat around, voluntary work. I assume this is like kind of volunteer work, extracurricular stuff, having effect when your test optional. Does that? I think I'm extrapolating from the question a little bit, but does that mean that these other things take on more weight? And what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think to some extent, this is really going to depend on the college and how they look at things. But certainly when you're taking test scores out of it, I think colleges are going to look, already we do a pretty thorough review of everything that you submit. But certainly I think it's going to be a piece that we're looking at really closely, but it already was. And obviously volunteer work or your extracurriculars, like everything looks a little different right now. So I want to make sure you also know that we're going to sort of adjust with that. I'm also really excited. We start reviewing applications in the next week or two. I'm so excited to see all the creative sort of COVID friendly activities that students have figured out and how they're making those work, as we're also trying to figure those out on our college campus. So I will say, I think activities for many colleges have already been important. They were important at Agnes Scott, and it's still going to be something that we're paying attention to, though certainly we understand changes and fluctuation and what that involvement looks like because of COVID.
Yeah, very good. So Scott, we're going to enter into a part of the evening that I like to call bold predictions. Are you ready?
Sure.
So this is stemming from a question in the Q&A that says, do you think that the class of 22 will also not have to take, this whole test score optional inflection point? Is it a flash in the pan? Is this a, big trend that's going to change college admission? So tell us, Jedi.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Rick, if I should start this sentence with I hope or it will. So
well, it is bold prediction.
I think there has to be a change to this landscape. Absolutely must be a change to landscape. There's been so many institutions, Amy's institution, clearly Agnes Scott is one that's been test optional for 10 years, doing it really, really well. And there are lots of other institutions out there like Agnes Scott that are doing this exceptionally well. And I believe that we need to continue to have more institutions jumping on that list, jumping on that bandwagon and becoming test optional. Because one of the things that you said earlier is, we've spent time looking at what is predictive, like what does a successful student look like at our institutions? And many of us will say, and will continue to say, that SAT or ACT scores for the most part don't really matter and don't really play a significant role in the admissions process. So I'm making the bold prediction that yes, we will continue to be test optional, but I have to put the one caveat in: we don't have the absolute authority to make that decision. Mm-hmm. Rick and our institutions are governed by a board of regents, and they make decisions for the 29 state colleges and universities. And so while I'm making the bold prediction that yes, we will continue to be test optional, I do have to put that one caveat that the regents could decide to go in a different direction, but I hope not.
Yeah. Well, and along those lines, this is why you've seen, I think, mainly privates, but there have been publics as well who have done 3-year pilots, because that allows you to bring in a class, see how they do. Yep. Like we said earlier, map it back, and then, but not be maybe committed to it where you have to reverse something. So, it's kind of all over the map in this regard, although I'm going to put something in the chat or the Q&A that gives people a good resource where they can go and see schools that are test optional, as well as are they on a 1-year, are they on a 3-year, et cetera. Travis, bold predictions. What do you think about either what Scott mentioned or other things? How is admission changing in general? Testing's not the only thing. What else do you see out there?
Yeah, I think to answer the first question, I think it's a thing that's hard to go back to once you start to see the benefits of some of that. And I think kind of nationally, people are looking at other things, non-cognitive ways to assess applications. And so I think that there'll be an uptick on that. And for students, it's kind of those things about you that make you, your citizenship, your personal qualities. And colleges are looking at how to evaluate that. So I think that we'll continue to go down that path. I think for at least the next 2 years would be my prediction that we will be test optional or test flexible of some sort as a nation. And so that's not an Emory position as much as a national kind of position.
Okay, great. How about you, Amy? Either along the testing lines or just how do you see things changing? Maybe if somebody's on the line tonight, either they're a senior, I know there's definitely some juniors on the call as well. So what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think test optional admission has been like one of my bright spots of COVID-19, because I think it really allowed a lot of schools to say, you know, this is something we've been interested in. And now there's a really compelling reason to try this out. And actually, I should say, Agnes Scott, we piloted the program for 5 years before making it a permanent piece of our process. So I'm really hopeful that this will be a permanent thing at a lot of schools. Right now, I think it's about 70% of colleges and universities across the US that are test optional. And then a much smaller number, probably under 100 schools that are test blind. So I am hopeful to see test blind numbers increase. I'm hopeful to see test optional numbers increase. I mean, as far as bold predictions, I think that's my boldest one that I have the most hope invested in. So that's my big one.
Okay. So mine is, I think this year that in general, you're going to see admit rates go up. I actually think that, you know, schools are going to be putting more admits out there on the street than they have in recent years for a couple reasons. One is because of the financial hit that most of higher ed took. I think that schools had some retention issues. We saw clearinghouse data came out across the country. Undergrads are down 4%. The first year classes overall were down 16%. I do think schools are going to try to be making some of that up. You know, so I think more admits and also yield, right? The number of kids that say yes to our offers has been going down, but with a lot of uncertainty out there, whether it be COVID and getting international students here, whether it be, again, ability to pay because of financial situations that a lot of economists would say is still coming. It just seems like people are going to have to make more admissions out there. The other thing, and this, I don't love this one, and I don't even know how bold this is, but I just think we're in a new timeline as well. I think that the May 1st or May timeline of, you know, make a decision, commit to a school, stick with that school, see you in August is sort of blown up. I think that there's a lot more movement and activity happening in the summer. And so one thing I would like to tell seniors before you ever get deferred or waitlisted or anything like that is, if that happens to you this year more than ever, if you really love a school, hang on, because it doesn't mean you're coming off that wait list, and it doesn't mean that it's going to go your way in the end. But don't just punt on a school in December if they defer you, because there's just going to be a lot more admits out there, I think, and a lot of it trickling through a longer period of time than maybe we've seen in the past. I think we've done a pretty good job of getting to some of the chat questions, but given that we've got a good 10 minutes left, I wanted to throw something else out there. And I'll just say caveat, you know, this never really happens, but you got two students, okay? They look the same, you know, same information, but one has a test and one does not have a test, right? Is the student who does not have a test at a disadvantage? Are you just going to be saying, well, you know, they got the same GPA, they took the same classes, you know, but hey, that kid's got a test and we know what it is, and therefore we're taking that student. So I'd love to hear from everybody on that. I see some shaking of heads, but Travis, let's start with you.
These are like, I laugh at this because, you know, I have to put the caveat out there, you know, like you said, decisions like this are never made in a vacuum, in comparing one student against another student. But the student who has the test, it doesn't necessarily complete their story anymore, any better. And so I'm going to not take the answer. And like, there's no way that I could ever make that decision out of context or in that context. But I don't think it is a disadvantage to not submit your test score.
Follow up, and I want others to answer this, but follow up to you, Travis, is do you happen to know right now of your Emory applicants this year, what percentage are and are not test optional, saying, yes, I want you to look at my test, please don't look at my test?
Yeah, so I took a look at this earlier today, and it is right around 48%.
Okay.
But in terms of the percentage of applications that we've received, it's relatively small at this point.
Mhm.
We anticipate somewhere around a third of our students may choose to be test optional.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Amy, same questions, both of those.
I want to see both of those applications at Agnes Scott College. And I say that because most colleges across the US are not necessarily doing this like one for one, it's just not the way that Agnes Scott works. I don't think it's the way most colleges and universities across the country operate.
Mhm.
And so truthfully, I would love to see both of those applications. Like Scott said, Agnes Scott is an institution that really is able to admit students. And that's like what I love most about my job, is really seeing potential in applicants. So, and Agnes Scott is not alone. Georgia State is not alone. There are lots of colleges and universities out there like that. This so far in the cycle, and like Travis said, this is pretty early in our cycle still, but so far right now, we have about 55% of our students going test optional. And that is higher. So normally we have probably 20 to 25% of our students applying test optional. So it's definitely an increase.
Very good. Thank you. Scott?
So Rick, I'll say I would take both of those students. I am the most uniquely situated college or university on this call today. And I say that, and I don't say it lightly, Travis, because I know that you have, Emory at Oxford, but we are truly uniquely situated, because it's something I talked about earlier. We offer associates, bachelor's, master's, and PhD programs at GSU, not all on the Atlanta campus. We're an institution that is looking to find a reason to admit a student, not to keep them off of our campus in any way, shape, or form. But for whatever reason, if a student doesn't meet our Atlanta campus admission standard, I have the opportunity to offer them a place at Perimeter College, to offer them a place at our associate degree, one of our associate degree granting campuses. And so we never deny students. We offer them another alternative or another opportunity if they don't meet that Atlanta campus admission standard. So that's why I say we are uniquely situated differently than others here.
No, that's true, and a good point. And actually something that has been brought up several times is just this idea that, first of all, nationally, the overall average admit rate is somewhere around 66, 67%. I actually would again contend that's probably going up this year, not down, because of some of the things we just discussed. And again, probably now more than ever, you don't have to read far on the internet to realize like higher ed needs students. We need students. And so I do think that if a kid is doing a good job of looking around, obviously just on this call alone, but just in our vicinity, in our region, so many good choices and options, and so many great financially and academically good fits. So for Georgia Tech, we are sitting at a little over 30% of our students saying test optional, and for our Georgia applicants, it's a little closer to 40%. So what we're seeing already as we're reading is great students both ways. Some have it, some don't. The only other thing I'll say, just speaking for Georgia Tech, because I won't speak for others, but our mentality going into this year is even if you have a test, it's not the same as we might have looked at it before, right? Because it's not apples to apples. A lot of students probably took it fewer times. What are the conditions under which they took that test? And so even if a student sends a test to us, I would say we're not even necessarily considering it in the same way. But I do think, Travis, your point from earlier is a good one around, as at least one reference point is those middle 50% to kind of look at from the year before. So that's good stuff. I wanted to open it up to you guys and see if there was anything that we didn't get to that you either saw in chat or wanted to make a point about for families, or something specific to your institution you wanted to throw out there that you haven't had a chance to work into the conversation.
Rick, there's a question about demonstrated interest. Are most schools tracking demonstrated interest, whether or not they consider ability to get engaged in the last year?
Great. You want to take that, or you want to farm it out?
No, I'm gonna punt that one to you guys. I think you all are better situated than a Georgia State to answer this one. So I'm gonna kick it to you all.
Travis, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so Emory does not track demonstrated interest, and we are not doing that this year or previously. But I will say that we are making sure that we're meeting students where they are in the virtual kind of space. So whether it is through tours, panels, presentations and sessions with faculty members, current students, and so forth. But demonstrated interest does not matter to Emory.
Amy?
Yeah, it's definitely not a piece of our formal review process, but Agnes Scott is a small, interesting, unique college. And so we love getting to know students through the admission process, and we certainly want to interact with you and get to know you through that. Certainly if you do an evaluative interview as part of your application, we have like a really, concrete way of getting to know you in that process, but it is not a formal part of our admission process.
Good. Yeah, and same for Georgia Tech, certainly. And, I've been on some panels and webinars with some colleagues around the country recently who traditionally have used, demonstrated interest. And I mean, again, as we've said all along, like you've got to ask the schools and kind of hear it directly from them. But I would say that, the thing about a global pandemic is that we are all living it together, right? It's global and it's pan, so it is all twice. And so people get it. And I hear those folks backing off of this concept around demonstrated interest. I mean, the one thing I would say is for the schools that are pretty overtly using it, they're pretty much all have an interview as part of their process. So, that's going to be a do for those schools for sure, but asking your direct questions is certainly key. Yeah.
Can I add something? So I guess I want to throw this out for the panelists. We're saying test optional means test optional. So the question about, should I take the ACT? I almost interpreted that like, should I find an ACT? Should I go out of my way to try to take the SAT? And so I think that would be a good thing for all of us to comment on. Personally, I think you should try to look at fairtest.org. I don't think we can put it in the Q&A, but fairtest.org is the best site I know of to give you sort of full information on test optional schools. And they have like a good list of who's test optional, who's test blind. So I would recommend looking at that and figuring out, am I very interested in applying to schools that are still requiring the SAT or ACT? But again, more than 70% of US colleges and universities are not requiring it. So there are a lot of great schools out there that say, no, you don't need to do that.
Very good. And I did answer it in Treylee's question. So if people are able to see that, you can get the link that Amy just referred to. If y'all can see that, I'm not sure. Travis, what would you like to say about that?
I don't recall the question. I'm so sorry.
No, Amy was just, go ahead, Amy.
Should a student like go out of their way to try to take the SAT or ACT?
No, you should not. Not at all.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement. All right, so we already did, bold predictions. So Julie, do I have one more minute?
You have about 30 seconds.
Oh man, well, shoot. My last lightning round was what is something lately that's given you hope? So
you have time for that. Absolutely, go.
All of us lightning round. All right, Travis, what's given you hope lately?
I've seen so many young people who are active and engaged in not only the political process but social as well.
Great, Amy.
I just feel like the next generation of students are so resilient and adaptable, and I love that you're going to bring that to our campuses. That is an amazing trait to take with you.
Thank you. Scott?
That we will get this through this pandemic. We are going to get back to a sense of normalcy. We're excited to have more and more students back on our campuses. I know that some of that is going to start this spring, despite some of the things that are happening. We're going to get back to a sense of normalcy, and I'm excited about what that's going to bring in 2021.
Awesome. And for me, just out of the blue the other day on our doorstep, somebody just left a ton of candy and some really nice notes to everybody in our family. And it was just such an encouraging, uplifting thing. So really great. Julie, thanks for the opportunity.
Oh my gosh, thank you, you guys. And I think, if I had to say one thing that's giving me hope, it's these kind of conversations that we can reach out to students and let them know there's not a trick. Halloween was 2 days ago. There are no tricks. Like, we want to do the best by you to get you to the place where that's going to help you become who you're supposed to be. So that said, I just want to remind everyone that we do have some additional things coming up. So when you click out of this session, there will be a quick survey. So if you don't mind answering those 4 questions, help us help future students. Again, there'll be sessions on Wednesday night and Thursday night about specific colleges and universities. So please sign up for those, learn a little bit more about that place you might call home for the next 4 years. And then as well, if you want to go back and review this session or any of the sessions from this series, please do at the website at georgiaprobe/students. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Have a good evening and be well.